You ever sit through one of those leadership trainings? Come where you're like supposed to be learning game-changing stuff. I remember one, I'm sitting there. They're serving these croissants, right? Tasted like they were baked when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And the whole time I just kept thinking, is this it? You know? So generic, not even close to the actual stuff we deal with as leaders. Ben, I'm not alone here, right? You probably got your own stale croissant leadership training story. And it's frustrating. You invest time, energy, maybe even some cash. For what? So today, we're ditching those stale programs. We're going deep on something way more satisfying. Data-driven leadership development. Got a stack of research here about using hard data, real information to build leadership programs that actually work. The kind that spark aha moments instead of, is this it? And to help us unpack all this, I've got an expert in all things leadership and all things data joining me.
Happy to be here. You hit the nail on the head, about those stale programs. What's interesting is that organizations are finally realizing leadership development, it's not just a nice to have, it's essential.
And the research backs that up, doesn't it? Right off the bat, one stat really jumped out. Organizations with strong leadership development programs, they're 1.5 times more likely to outperform their competition. That's not just a fluffy feel-good number.
Yeah.
We're talking bottom line impact.
Exactly. This isn't just about checking a box. This is about investing in programs that get results and a data-driven approach.
Yeah.
That's how you make sure those investments are smart and strategic.
So how do we actually do that? Our sources kept mentioning KPIs. What are those in plain English? And why should we care?
Think of KPIs like your leadership compass. Instead of wandering around hoping you're developing the right skills, KPIs give you measurable goals. They tell you if you're on the right track.
Okay, a compass. I like that. So instead of getting lost in the leadership wilderness, we've got these clear markers guiding us. But what do those markers look like in real life?
It all depends on your goals. Let's say your team struggles with delegation, right? Bottlenecks everywhere because no one's empowering their people. So you run a workshop, focus on delegation skills. A KPI for that program could be the percentage of leaders who actually delegate a challenging task after the workshop. You're not just measuring if they like the training, you're measuring if it changed their behavior.
Right. It's not about feeling good. It's about making a real difference.
Exactly. And the beauty is you can tailor KPIs to your specific needs, your specific challenges. The important thing is to align those KPIs with your big picture business goals.
So we're talking about connecting leadership development to tangible results. Love it. But how do we get the information to track those KPIs in the first place? Where does all this data come from?
Just like a detective gathers clues, we need to tap into different sources of information. We've got to put on our data detective hats and start exploring. And that means looking at both qualitative and quantitative data.
Ooh, those sound kind of science way. Though I do love a good detective story. Break those down for me, will you?
You got it. Okay, imagine you're giving a presentation and you want feedback. Quantitative data is like the number of people who rate it good. It's numerical, easy to measure.
Makes sense. So what about the qualitative side?
That's like the actual feedback they give. Like, I loved your examples, or those slides were a bit text heavy. It's descriptive, gives you the why behind the numbers.
The full picture. The numbers tell you what's happening and the stories tell you why. Okay, I'm on board. Now, how do we gather all this intel? We setting up hidden cameras in our meetings now.
Ha. While I do love a good spy thriller, we can stick to less covert methods.
Good to know.
Our sources talk about surveys, feedback forms.
Those seem pretty standard.
Yeah, but they say go beyond the simple stuff, the rating.
Dig a little deeper.
Exactly. Instead of, on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective was this training? Ask something like, what's one specific thing you'll actually do differently based on what you learned?
Okay, so you're getting a measurable data point and some juicy qualitative insight for you. What about, I don't know, are there other ways to gather data? Besides surveys,
The research also mentions observational data. Instead of just asking people what they think they'd do differently, you actually observe them in action.
So after training on, say, coaching skills, you'd actually watch how they coach their teams.
Yeah. Are they using those new techniques? Is it making a difference?
It's like being a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Except, ethically and not in a creepy way.
Of course. You always want to be transparent about how you're collecting data, make sure everyone's comfortable. But let's say we've done all that, gathered all this data, we've got surveys, observations, the whole shebang. What then? It's not like it's useful just sitting there in a spreadsheet.
That's when it starts to feel like a puzzle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you've got all the pieces, but you need to put them together so they actually mean something.
Exactly, data interpretation. It's about finding patterns, trends, those aha moments that tell you what's really going on.
So you're looking for the insights that jump out and say, hey, this program is working. Or maybe, this needs some tweaking.
Yeah. And just like with puzzles, having the right tools helps. The research mentions things like Tableau, Google Analytics. These tools can turn a mountain of data into a story. With graphs, charts, and dashboards, makes it much easier to spot those trends and patterns.
Way better than staring at spreadsheets all day. But what do we do with those insights? How do we turn data into action?
That's where it gets really exciting. Remember those KPIs we talked about? This data tells us if we're hitting the mark. If we're not, it tells us where to course correct.
So it's a feedback loop, constantly refining, improving based on what the data tells you, not just your gut.
Yes. And remember that stat about companies with strong leadership programs outperforming their competitors? That's the power of continuous improvement.
It's not a one-and-done thing, right?
Yeah.
Leadership development is an ongoing process.
Absolutely. You're always tweaking, refining based on what you learn, and you create a culture of learning.
Which is good for everyone.
Exactly.
This is great. It's like we've cracked the code to building effective leadership programs.
And speaking of cracking codes, our sources mention something called the ADDIE model. You familiar with that?
The ADDIE model. Can't say I am.
It's a framework. It can really add another layer to this whole data-driven approach.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Basically, instead of just looking at data in a vacuum, the ADDIE model gives you a structured way to use that data for maximum impact.
I like the sound of that.
So there are 5 phases: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate.
5 phases.
And they're all connected. They all use data. So you're making decisions based on evidence, not just guesswork.
Love it. Okay, walk me through it. What happens in each phase?
So analyze, that's first, right? You use data to understand where you're at. What are your organization's leadership strengths? Where's there room for growth?
You got to know where you're starting from if you want to know where you're going, right?
Exactly. Then you move to design. You take all that data about your organization's needs and you use it to design leadership development programs.
So, what skills are you going to focus on? What kind of training will be most effective?
Yeah, you're custom building programs, tailoring them to your organization's specific challenges.
Backed by data.
Always backed by data. Okay, so you've designed your programs. Now it's time to develop and implement.
This is where the rubber meets the road. You're actually rolling out those programs, getting people into training sessions.
Yes, but it doesn't stop there.
Right. Because we're all about continuous improvement here. So what's the last phase?
Evaluate. This is where you close that feedback loop. You use data to see what's working, what's not, and how you can make your programs even better next time around.
Okay, so by combining data with a structured approach like the ADDIE model, we're really setting ourselves up for success.
Absolutely. It takes the guesswork out of leadership development. It's all about making smart, data-driven decisions every step of the way.
This is awesome. We're not just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. We're being strategic.
Yeah.
Using data to build something great.
It is like a recipe, isn't it? You start with the basics, but you taste as you go. You make adjustments.
And in this case, data is our taste test.
Exactly.
So data isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's insights, it's action, it's constant learning. That's what we've been talking about this whole time.
Yes. It's about making decisions based on evidence, not just gut feeling. And that goes for everything, really, not just leadership development.
We've covered so much ground today. For our listeners who are inspired, ready to dive into the data themselves, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
Every data point tells a story. Our job is to listen to those stories, to understand what they're telling us, and then we use that understanding to build better leaders, better teams, better organizations.
I love that. It's about the people, isn't it? The data helps us understand them better, support them better. It's powerful stuff. And for our listeners who are ready to get started, we've got a ton of resources in the show notes, tools you can use, tips for gathering data. We even have a whole deep dive into that ADDIE model we talked about. So until next time, remember, leadership development doesn't have to be a mystery. Let the data be your guide. You've got this.